Today we're going to talk about how to start and to feed and continue and perpetuate a sourdough. For many years bakers could not buy commercial yeast, so they had to start their own leaven, or sourdough as we call it today. So to do that we just need two ingredients. We have flour here, and we also have water. Now, there are a number of other ways to do it, but this is probably the most simple way. In addition to that, I have a scale and I have a mixing bowl and I have my two hands. So we're going to start off by turning on the scale, which we have here. It's a little small scale that you could have in your home or in the bakery. And then we're going to put a container on there, and we're going to tare that. Just push the little button there, so now it's 0. I'm going to weigh out some flour. And the total amount I'm going to use is 250 grams. So we're just about there. I need one more gram. Well, there's 250. Pretty close, you can see. I'm going to put that in my mixing bowl. And then I'm also going to re-tare this in case there's some residue of flour on there. I'm going to just take some water through this pitcher here. And I'm also going to weigh the exact amount of grams of flour as I did water as I'm going to do flour. So here's, we had 250 grams of flour, so I'm going to weigh the exact amount of water, if I can do this right. 250, now we're at 200, 220, 230. If I'm off by a gram or two, it's not going to make or break me here. But this is my favorite way to start. It is equal weight of flour and water. So I have 250 grams of flour in the mixing bowl, and now 250 grams of water. It would work the same if you used ounces, but grams is easier for me. And then once we have that, all we need is our two hands that are clean. I just washed my hands before the show. And what I'm going to do is just put one hand, clean hand, in the mixing bowl and one hand outside the bowl. And I'm just mixing it by hand until it looks more or less uniform. It's going to be a little bit messy, that's why I like to have just one hand inside the mixing bowl. And this flour is pretty dry because it's taking all the water. And most of the time when I do this, it's not so much a dough as more of a paste. But because when I have real dry flour, it will take it like this. And once I have it more or less uniform, that's all I have to do. There's nothing else in there. There's no yeast, there's no salt. It's strictly flour and water. And it's about room temperature. So if this was at roughly 75 Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius, I can set this off to the side, clean my hands. And a lot of bakers like to cover this. And I'm going to leave it here for 24 hours. And at the end of 24 hours, I can actually feed the sour. And we'll see that in just the next slide. We're going to continue with our sourdough, and this is actually 48 hours later. And as you can see, the flour and the water has grown for 48 hours. And of course, there's a bit of a smell, not much, after just one. We haven't actually even fed it yet. So we turn on the scale, and we're going to go ahead and tare it. And we'll use a little piece of this. How much we use, I'm going to make it real easy, and we're going to use 100 grams. So I use a spoon or my bare hands, whatever I want. And you'll find it's a little slimy. That's normal because of the bacterial fermentation. And we'll try to get about 100 grams, which is about 3 ounces or so. So it's not a whole lot. But when we grow a sour, we don't need a whole lot to start. So let's just say there's a reason we're using 100 grams, because it's easier to calculate the math. Okay, so there's 98. There's about 100. If we're a gram or two off, it won't kill us. And we can actually take this and what's remaining and give it to our neighbors, or we could throw it out. We really don't need it anymore. So I'll put it to the side. And then based on the amount of the sourdough that we have, or the starter, We have 100 grams, and we have what's called a multiplier, and I prefer to use a multiplier of 3. So for 100 grams of the starter, I need 300 grams of flour in this case. So I'm going to tare it. So 100 times 3 is 300. I'll try to put in about 300 grams and see if I have enough flour here. To do that, I'll probably have to get a little bit more. Okay, we'll start with 200 because that's all that fits in here. I'll put the 200 grams with the sour in the mixing bowl. And I still lack 100 grams more. So I'll grab that real quickly. We'll re-tare it. And we need 100 grams more. That'll give us 300 grams total. Well, we're close. We're just a couple grams short, and that won't hurt anything. So we'll go ahead and put this in. So we have just a couple grams short of 300 grams of flour. And then once I get my starter going, my own preference is to use about half the amount of water. And so if I had 300 grams of flour, 300 divided by 2 is 150. So I'm going to put away 150 grams of water here. We've tared it, and then we have our water. So I'll try to get 150. And generally speaking, if I make my sour starter a little bit more stiff, I get a little more of a sour flavor to it. That's why I'm reducing the amount of water to flour. If it's not perfect, that's okay. We're just starting the sour. So I take the water, put it in my mixing bowl. And of course, I've washed my hands, so I have clean hands. I can shut my scale off. And then I just mix it by hand. So, not terribly complicated. So I just have 3 things in here. I have the flour and water, which was fermented for 48 hours 2 days ago. That was actually 100 grams of that. And then I have 300 grams of fresh flour, which is a multiplier of 3. And then of the amount of flour I used, which was 300 grams, I'm using half of that amount in water, which is 150. So in total, I have 300 grams of flour, 150 grams of water, or some people prefer to use milliliters of water, that's the same as grams. And then I have 100 grams of my starter. So I'll just push this around a little bit. And it's going to be pretty dry, that's normal. In fact, if I think it's too dry, there's nothing illegal about putting a little more water into it. It's not that scientific at this point, because we're just starting it. Once we have it established, then we'll have to be a little more precise with the amount of water and flour that we're using. In fact, the multipliers usually are between either 2, 3, 4, or 5. And I just like to use 3 because it's easier to remember and it's kind of in the middle of that range. So just enough water where I don't have any flour that's loose. I want to get all the flour and water incorporated. Again, I keep one hand clean or without flour and dough in it, and one hand in the dough. Of course, my hands are clean before I started. And then what we have here is a dough. Looks like this. Most of it's off my hands. And then we'll set that aside for another day or so, and then we'll see what it looks like.